religious traditions or the ancient philosophers all the way up into the present. What we're attempting to do is to take it one step further. So if you've heard somebody like a Norman Vincent Peale say that there's power in positive thinking, what we want to do is test to see how much change is possible and what steps an individual can do to make that change possible. And if they make those changes, what then does that do to the people around them in terms of a ripple effect? What does that do to their organizations? What does that do to their achievement scores in school if it's a student, or to their performance at work if it's an employee? And so for me, it's exciting that it's not just claims about what makes us happy or why happiness is valuable. It's actually showing us scientific reasons for all the things we've already heard in the past.
Okay. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the details of how to do that. Talking with Shawn Achor here. Okay. So that's also a fascinating piece, is that one of the ways that I came to be a happier person was coming from studying the mystics from that esoteric version. And so now over the years, I find it fascinating that science is able to show it, and with brain scanning, etc. One of the things that came across my path a couple of years ago is that there was a study that was done with the Dalai Lama and some of the Buddhist monks. I'm sure you're familiar with that research.
Yes.
Where they were able to do brain scans, and they were involved with that and show their state of peace, essentially. So I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that residual effect and how a single person who has a higher happiness quotient affects those around them. I'd love to hear more about that.
It's so much fun to do this. One of the things I do is I have an experiment that I designed that's very, very simple. What I do is, and I've done this in all the countries that I've visited, you just have people partner up, and you get them to think something very difficult is about to happen. But what you're basically doing is you have one person try and go neutral, try and control all their body, their mind, their thoughts, and their face, trying to make sure that they just remain neutral, that they don't show any emotion, they don't think any thoughts, they're not showing any fear or anything to the other partner. And they're using all of their decades of self-discipline and control to do this. And then you have the other person just look at them in the eyes, and then for 7 seconds, just smile at them genuinely. And what we see is that when that happens, between 80 to 85% of people worldwide cannot control themselves during those 7 seconds. They actually break down a smile. I just did this experiment this past summer working with all senior-level executives, actually all male in their 50s, at a bank that's struggling right now. And this is in Tokyo, Japan, and their smile ratio on that was 82%. So what we're finding is something very universal. And the reason why I do that experiment, it doesn't predict anything about those people. It doesn't predict whether or not you're happy or not. But what it shows, what it's illustrative of, is that if you put somebody into a brain scan and they start to smile, their brain lights up and shows activation, telling that individual that they're smiling, which isn't that exciting. But if you put somebody into a brain scan and they do what I just had them do in that experiment, which is they try not to smile while someone is smiling at them, these small parts of their brain start to show activation, and they're called mirror neurons. Mirror like you look at in the morning, a neuron like a small part of the brain. These mirror neurons activate, and what they do is they basically tell the brain that you're smiling. But you're not smiling, the other person's smiling. But before you can stop yourself, your brain then releases a chemical called dopamine into the brain, raising your levels of happiness. And your face starts to contort into a smile before you can stop yourself. We've seen this happen with yawns. If one person yawns, right, other people around them will start to yawn as well. We've seen a contagious effect that's finally explained by the brain science, where we found that there are these mirror neurons that hardwire us not just for sympathy, they hardwire us for empathy, which means when we see someone in our visual field experiencing something, it makes us more likely to experience it. Now, the reason that's important is that if you have 15 people waiting for a plane or for a subway, and you introduce a Confederate who's a researcher but no one else knows that it's a researcher, these 15 strangers are just waiting for a plane, and you have that Confederate come and stand in the middle of them and just bounce nervously in place and tap their foot on the floor and look at their watch repeatedly. Between 7 to 12 of the 15 individuals within a 2-minute span of time, we'll start to pick up on those behaviors. They'll start to bounce nervously in place or look at their watch repeatedly or tap their foot impatiently. And what we found is that positivity and negativity spread because our brains are linked wirelessly through this mirror neuron network. So everyone at work, everyone at school, even the strangers we meet waiting for a plane or waiting in line at Starbucks, their brains are actually picking up on the cues that we give them. Now, those could be our anxiety and stress, and everyone's seen that happen before where somebody's so nervous about meeting up with a client, for example, that they make the client anxious and then they lose the sale. But we've also seen leaders who are so calm and confident in the midst of a crisis that other people around them start to pick up on that as well. So what we're looking at when we do this research, and what I work with these companies and schools on, is how do we make it so that, first of all, you buffer yourself against the negative effects of the people around you. Now, that can be anything from the news, constantly hearing negative information, or a toxic employee, or people around you that are anxious about changes in the political or economic landscape. But not to stop there, because that just gets us back to neutral again. What we're really interested in is the fact that every single person has these mirror neurons means that a single positive change you make to your own life, to the way your brain sees the world, has the chance then of rippling out to your coworkers, to your family members, to your peers, even a stranger waiting at Starbucks with you.
Okay. So in the research, does it show whether a positive perspective has any greater strength than a lesser, more negative perspective? Is that showing in the research at all?
It's a great question, and it's the question everyone wants to know. So which is stronger, the positive or the negative?
Right.
And we want it to be positive. But when we look at the research, we found that the answer is it depends. And as scientists, we hate that answer, except when it depends on another variable. So I'll explain what that means. What we found is that we do know that smiles are 10 times more contagious than frowns. We don't know why that is quite yet. The other thing we know is that your brain reacts very quickly to threat. So it looks for the negative first by default. So those kind of cancel each other out. What we find is that it's not determined based upon positive or negative about whether or not something is going to spread. What we found is if you have 3 strangers come into a room, all with different emotions, the other 2 are more likely to leave with the person, with the most expressive person's emotion and mood. What that means is it's not positivity or negativity that's the variable that matters. What matters is how expressive, verbally and non-verbally, you are of that negativity or that positivity. So if you're an extremely positive person, but you're surrounded by people who are negative and who are much more vocal about that or much more non-verbally expressive of that frustration, negativity, and pessimism, then your brain's going to more likely pick up on that negativity. But if you are a very positive person and you're expressive both verbally and non-verbally of that positivity, then you're changing the social script, causing other people to pick up on that positivity and leave that meeting or that room or that classroom with your emotion.
Okay, so what if you have 2 expressive people, one positive and one negative? What happens then?
It's very hard for us to test equally expressive, because expressiveness is something that's subjectively affected. So what we find is then the person's predisposition is what causes them to shift in one direction or the other. What that means is, let's say you are in a room with 2 people who are equally expressive, positive and negative. What we find then is your actions, your mindset, then decide which one you're actually going to pick up on. So if you started your morning, for example, thinking of things you're grateful for, if you woke up this morning and you exercised to start the day, or you wrote in a journal, or you meditate, or any of these habits that we know that create happiness or predispose us towards it, then when you have equal forces like that, your brain goes for the positive route and ignores the negative one. And as a result of that, you can keep that happiness advantage rolling even in the midst of conflicting positivity and negativity in your environment.
All right, excellent. That's good to know. Shawn Achor here we're discussing the happiness advantage, the 7 principles of positive psychology that fuel success and performance at